Hello and welcome to Your Yes-Filled Life. I'm Brenda Winkle, and this podcast is for high-performing, empathic women who are ready to stop second-guessing themselves and start trusting what they know. Maybe you're successful in your career or business. People rely on you. You make difficult decisions every day, and yet sometimes the moment someone else's emotions, expectations, or opinions enter the conversation, your own clarity starts to disappear. If you've ever wondered, how can I be so confident everywhere else in my life but struggle to trust myself when it comes to my own needs, you are in the right place. Each week, we'll explore self-trust, nervous system regulation, emotional energy, boundaries, intuition, and the everyday moments where your life changes, not because you've become someone new, but because you learn to stay connected to yourself. I'll share client stories, my own experiences, practical tools, and honest conversations to help you stop abandoning yourself and start creating a life that's truly your own. Because I believe you already know more than you trust, and that is a yes-filled life. I'm so glad you're here. Let's begin. Hello and welcome to Your Yes-Filled Life. I'm your host, Brenda Winkle. Today on the podcast, we're going to be talking about how boundaries may not actually be the solution you're looking for. And I know when I say that, you're thinking, but wait, Brenda, you talk about boundaries all the time. And you're right, I do. And I do believe in boundaries, and I believe in boundary frameworks, and I believe in boundary templates and boundary scripts. But here's the thing. As an empath, you're wired differently. And maybe you don't yet identify as an empath. Maybe you identify as having empathic characteristics. And if that's the case, this still applies for you. Because when we have deep wells of empathy and compassion, if we use traditional methods to set boundaries, a lot of times we end up feeling harsh. We end up overgiving in several areas of our lives, and then we act in entitled ways in other areas of our lives. And we can start to feel really frustrated and think that all that we are doing is setting boundaries. And then we feel kind of like a bitch, and we don't want to feel that way. So then we roll back some of the boundaries that we had set. What if boundaries aren't the problem or the solution? What if we're looking at a different lens to solve the problem with? The problem is that there is a lack of self-loyalty, a lack of self-empathy, a lack of self-compassion, and perhaps even a lack of self-love in certain cases. Now, before you say, Brenda, that's not me, just hang in there for just one more second. Because I think we've been talking about boundaries all wrong, especially when it comes to empaths. Because I don't think that's where the conversation should start. Now, I'm saying this after having been in the work that I now do for the last 11 years, served hundreds of clients, probably getting into the thousands at this point. And I feel like the boundary work is solving the surface level problem when there's actually something much deeper happening. I hear all the time people say things like, I know I should have said no, or I know I should have explained that differently, or I should have asked for help, or I should have said the thing. And it's not that that's not necessarily true, but what's really happening is that they think there might be a consequence, and this is all happening in nanoseconds, right? They think there might be a consequence to them setting a boundary that feels really good, and so there ends up to be a level of self-abandonment, meaning you aren't going to protect the things that you wanted to protect, you aren't going to keep the promises to yourself, and then we end up in negative self-talk because our self-talk says something like, I did it again. I can't believe I did it again. And I'm saying this because I've worked with so many of you and I see the same thing again and again and again. And I also remember it deeply in my own self. And I'm going to share with you what shifted this for me today. What shifted everything for me was taking the focus away from boundaries and putting the focus on standards. Now, we all know the word standards. We see that word on the restroom wall. We have the highest standards of cleanliness. Please let us know if our bathroom needs attention. We see it in terms of standard of living. We talk about standards of living across different cities or different states or even different countries. So we know the word standard, but let's apply it to ourselves. Let's apply it to what we are willing to tolerate and accept. Because when we start to think about our standards, all of a sudden the conversation shifts because it becomes more about what reflects my standard. So, for example, if we think about values, and I'm just going to do a very high level values talk here. If we think about values, values are what matter most to you. Examples of common values would be valuing honesty, peace, wellness, health, family, financial security, integrity, freedom, creativity, so on and so forth. One of the places that we sometimes have a little bit of tension is if our behaviors don't match our values. So, for example, if you say that you value health and wellness, and you're going to exercise with your trainer 3 times a week, and then you aren't protecting your sleep, you aren't drinking enough water, you're not consistently eating the foods that you know are best for you and your unique body, then there's a little mismatch there between how you're living as far as your standards and your values. And that creates a pattern of negative self-talk. The same thing could happen if you promise yourself you're not going to overgive, you're not going to work for free. This is literally my story. I'll tell you the story on TikTok. So I learned early on that when I go live on TikTok, people love my readings. They absolutely love them. What I was having a hard time discerning was, where am I being of value, providing service, and where am I overgiving and working for free? And it took me a long time, seriously, a long time, about 6 or 7 months, to negotiate where that line was between what felt like I could freely give in a generous way and where was I just giving it all away. And the moment that I figured that out, I went live. I didn't realize that I'd figured it out, although I sort of did because I knew my standard had changed. But the moment I figured it out, I went live on a Sunday afternoon and gained 258 followers in one 54-minute live. Up to this point, it had taken me more than 2 years to get to 1,200 followers. But the minute I raised my standard, people could feel it and they were drawn to it. And the same thing is going to happen to you. The minute you raise your standards, things are going to begin to move. So thinking about how your standards show up in your life is going to be where your values match your lived experience. So if you value honesty, then you will require your closest relationships and any relationship to be honest and truthful and transparent with you. You will require that level of honesty in your relationships. And when people don't meet that standard, there's no emotionality about it. There's just like, oh, well, my standard is honest, open, transparent relationships, and this doesn't meet my standard. So you don't continue the relationship or you don't nurture the friendship because you know it doesn't match your values. It doesn't meet your standard. The same thing could be true in hotels. So hotels, I love to travel, and there's a big, big, big difference between a 1-star hotel and a 5-star hotel. 1-star hotel being like Motel 6 or that equivalent, and 5-star hotel would be something like Hotel Bel Air. Okay. There's a difference in the standards at every topic, whether it's the finishes, the fabrics, the service, the food, the space, the grounds, the neighborhood. there's a difference in standards, huge difference in standards between a one-star hotel and a five-star hotel. I like nice things. I like nice places. I like nice hotels. My standard fits that. My home is nice. It's got nice finishes. My bet would be your home is nice and it's got nice finishes, and you probably keep it up pretty well, aside from a few piles here and there, like most of us. That's a standard. Where we get ourselves into trouble is if we value one thing and our standard isn't matching that value. And one place I see it a lot with my high performing, especially female clients. I don't see this so much with my male clients, but with my high performing female clients that have jobs outside of the home or they own businesses or they're entrepreneurs, is they have a tendency to take on more than their fair share of the household load. So, for example, high performer goes to work for hours. She runs like medical departments in hospitals. She owns businesses. She is a mover and a shaker doing big things in the world. And then she comes home and has to deal with a sink full of dishes that her family has accumulated throughout the day. So she's got one set of standards at work. She probably has a team supporting her, either in her business or in her job or in her role. And then she comes home and feels like she's gotten a demotion because now she's cleaning up after people. Now, there's no harm and there's no judgment in cleaning up your home. I like to clean my home too. And I take time every day to do my own dishes. I'm not saying that we shouldn't each take the time that we need to pour into our own homes. What I am saying is if you're a high performer and you're a mover and a shaker in your professional world, and then you are tolerating people not cleaning up after themselves in your home, there's a value standard mismatch. And so there might be an opportunity there to raise your standard. So, for example, with one client, this was literally her situation. She was going to work, a very high powered, high stress job, and she was coming home to a wrecked kitchen. It could be clean from the night before. She would come home, the kitchen was wrecked, sink full of dishes, things from all day on the counters, and then she was expected to prepare dinner for her family. And so we talked about what that was doing to her intuitive access, what that was doing to her own empowerment, how that was impacting her at work, and decided that that was no longer a standard that she wanted to live with. And so she raised her standard. And her standard became, I will cook in a clean kitchen. And what that meant is, if the kitchen is clean, she will prepare dinner for the family. If the kitchen is not clean, she won't. And it was a big shift for her family when she instituted that standard. And it did take conversation. There wasn't just like a passive aggressive deciding that she was going to do something without telling anybody. She did let people know. She let people know that that was going to happen. And they didn't take her seriously. So the next day after that conversation, she came home from work. The dishes and the food on the counter had piled up during her day. And she went into the living room where the family was watching TV and playing games. And she said, I'm going to go read. Let me know when the kitchen is clean and I'll start dinner. And her family did not take her seriously. And so she ended up eating cereal in her room because she refused to cook dinner for the family because her standard was, I cook in a clean kitchen. She had left a clean kitchen the night before, and she would cook when the kitchen was clean. It only took one day of her doing that before her new standard took root in the family, and her family began to take their share of the responsibility. And that's really what we're talking about here. We're not talking about a standard that everybody serve you, although, if that works for you, great. I don't think most of us have situations where that can happen. But we're talking about people carrying their own share of whatever load it is that is being shared by the whole family or by the whole organization. So where do you need to look at your standards? What is it that you are doing right now that's bugging you, that's creating tension, that's creating stress in your life? And where can you adjust the standard? Because if you look at it like a boundary, In other words, if my client had said to her children, I'm setting a boundary, you must clean the kitchen while I'm gone. Well, that's not a boundary. Any therapist, which I am not, any therapist will tell you that's not a boundary. That's an expectation. And if she was going to set that boundary, it would require her to enforce that boundary, which would mean that she would need to oversee them cleaning the kitchen. But instead of setting a boundary, she set a standard. And her new standard was, here's what I will and will not do. Here's what I require in order for me to do this thing. Here's what I require. That's the standard. So an example would be, I require relationships in my life to be trustworthy, honest, and reciprocal. If somebody comes into my life and they want to have any type of relationship with me, whether it's friendship or acquaintance or romantic partner, and they exhibit honest, transparent, trustworthy, reciprocal, I am going to let that relationship naturally develop because it meets my standards. And when I encounter somebody who is not reciprocal, not transparent, not trustworthy, not honest, I don't get upset about it. I don't make it mean anything about them. It's not from a place of judgment. I just know I require my relationships to be reciprocal, honest, trustworthy, and reciprocal. Did I say reciprocal twice? I might have meant to say transparent. The point is, your standard is what you require, what you are willing to tolerate or not tolerate. So another example would be the clothing that you wear. What are your standards? Are your standards that you will continue to wear shoes with holes in the soles? Or are your standards that when there's a little bit of wear on the tread, you replace your shoes? What's your standard? What's your standard for how you want to be treated? What's your standard for how you want people to engage with you? And I promise you that when you raise your standards, there might be a little bit of a process in the interim as people understand your standards. Things are going to be so much easier for you. You're going to be able to have more access to your own intuition. You're going to have more bandwidth to do the things that are important to you, that are part of your soul mission. Because the truth is, if you're not raising your standards to protect your bandwidth, your intuition, your energy, your joy, your peace, it's costing you in immeasurable ways. And so when you think about the standard, I want you to think about the situation that's causing you the most stress in your life right now, whether it's a relationship with a child or a relationship with a partner or a situation at your work. And I want you to let yourself really feel into that situation. Probably not going to feel great. And then get curious, what standard could I set that could help improve how I feel about this situation? I'm going to say that again. What standard could you set that might help improve how you feel about this situation? Whether it's respected or peaceful or joyful. And how can you set the standard up so that you have more time, energy, bandwidth to put towards the things that really matter to you? Boundaries are often taught so that there's a need for a framework or a script, and that is useful. I have no problem with that. I've even taught that. But what I have found is that when we set the standard first, we don't need the script because it's so obvious. So, for example, if I know that I'm not going to work for free, then it becomes obvious for me to say, I would love to share my booking link with you so that you could buy a session. It's obvious because my standard is I don't work for free. If I didn't have that standard, then I might be worried about how do I set a boundary with somebody? And then I get all up in my head. And so maybe it's just semantics. Maybe it's just me and my semantics, but I don't think so because I've watched the same thing happen over and over and over with my clients. When they raise their standards, everything shifts. I've also seen it in a standard of a very high-powered very successful entrepreneur, owns a multi seven figure company. And she raised her standard around what she was willing to accept for payment for speaking. And she raised it a lot. She raised it from like $3,000 to $15,000. So it's $15,000 to even get her to set foot on your stage. And the minute that she raised her standard in that way, those offers came in. It was a matter of days before her first $15,000 offer came in. It was stunning. Was she a little scared to set that standard? Yeah. She was really thinking about, what am I doing? Is anyone going to buy from me? Is anyone going to book me at this price? But she realized that the cost to her family, to her business of her traveling, preparing a talk, giving the talk, she realized that the cost was a lot more expensive than she'd been giving it credit for. So she raised her standard. And now she has so much more capacity and time to do the things that she wants to do. And when she delivers a talk, you better believe it is absolutely top notch. That's how you live with standards. It's not necessarily about the boundaries. The boundaries happen automatically. So if you aren't clear on what your standards are across all topics, and if you aren't clear on how you're living into your values, then every decision feels a little bit confusing because you're filtering them through other people's opinions, you're filtering them through your own opinions, and you start to negotiate yourself. You might find yourself asking people what they think. You might find yourself in loops of complaining about the same thing or the same people. And you might start looking outside of yourself for the answers. But when your standards are clear, the decisions become really obvious. Not necessarily easy, but obvious. I have one client who raised the standard in how she was willing to be treated. And she was treated very respectfully at work, and she was not being treated respectfully at home by her partner. And as she raised the standards, it became very clear that as painful as it was, her husband did not meet her standard of treatment. And he was unwilling to treat her in a better way. And she chose to end that marriage. Was that easy? No, it was not easy. It was not simple, but it was obvious that it was the right choice. It did take a tremendous amount of courage to raise the standard. And it's interesting because whether we're talking about my client who raised her speaking fee or my client who chose to leave a marriage where she was not being treated well, we go through the same process of, is anyone going to be there for me if I raise this standard? What will people think? Can I uphold this standard? And then ultimately the question is, am I worth it? And the answer is yes, you are worth it. So when we think about raising your standards, what standard would you go to first if you were going to adjust a standard? Would it be how much financial security you have, or how you're treated at home, or how much fun you're allowed to have by yourself? Like you're the one allowing yourself to have fun in your work week. How many times are you allowing yourself to laugh? What's your minimum standard? If you're asking what your standard is, you're really asking what aligns best with who I am. What aligns best with my current identity? And identity is always shifting. And so it makes sense that your standards might also evolve and shift. I have found that my standards have evolved and shifted over different courses of identities. And my guess is yours too. I mean, I think about my very first apartment was an apartment that was in a house that had been divided into 5 different apartments. It was fine. It was safe. It was very close to the college. It would not meet my current standard of where I want to live. But that doesn't make it bad or wrong. That was my current standard. That was back in the 90s. So my standards have come a long way in what I feel like is my minimum standard of where I want to live. My guess is you can relate to this. The same thing happens to us in what we're willing to accept from being treated at work, at home, in relationships, how we want to feel, how financially secure we want to be. Those are all related to our standards. And this is one of the reasons I created Power, because I have found that when it comes to setting up our standards, sometimes we have some nervous system stuff to work through. We have some old stress patterns to work through. We have some subconscious beliefs to shift. And Power becomes a place where you can practice living into what you know now, living into your current standard of whatever it is. Because the truth is, you don't need more information. You need to align your standards with your values, and that will inform how you set boundaries around everything in your life. It will inform whether or not you can start the business, whether or not you can grow the business, whether or not you choose to stay in a career or retire from a career or stay in the relationship or start the new one. Your standards are informing every single piece of your life. And so, as we work in building nervous system capacity to really live into our standards, that's when we start to unlock tremendous progress. I have found for myself, and in hundreds of clients that I've worked with over the last 11 years, that the moment you raise standards is the moment things shift. And it is scary to set those standards, especially if we're making a change in standards, which is why we practice in Power. It's why it's a year-long program with breaks in the middle, so you have time to integrate in between each live cohort. You have a chance to live and see what's coming up for you. What's coming up for you in your relationships? What's coming up for you in your work? And then you bring that back to the next cohort of Power. Even though we're connected the whole time in a WhatsApp group, you bring it back and then you work through the Power framework again. And it helps you raise those standards because it helps you embody them, because we're creating the safety in your body so that it doesn't feel like there's a threat of change, because we're working with your nervous system. And that's literally what Power is for. The next cohort is going to begin late September, early October 2026. And your next step, if this sounds good to you, would be to get on the wait list so that you're the first to know when the doors open to Power, because there will be a limited enrollment. And you can go join the wait list at the link in the show notes or the link in the YouTube description. And then there are moments where you're facing a very specific decision. You don't necessarily need a framework. You need support working through a career transition or business growth or business expansion or a relationship shifting or a season when there just feels like there's so much change, you want some support. Or maybe for you, it's deepening into the intuitive knowing you already have. That's where private coaching can be really powerful. It's not that I'm going to tell you what to do, but I am going to reflect things back to you, ask you about different behaviors, show you patterns that I'm seeing so that you can really hear yourself clearly enough to make the decision that is yours to make. And I'll put the link in the show notes as well, or you can go to brendawinkle.com to find everything about Power and private coaching right there on the homepage. I don't think the goal is necessarily to become someone with stronger boundaries. I think that's the outcome that will come when you raise your standards. I think the goal really is to become someone with such deep self-trust that your boundaries naturally reflect your values and protect your standards. It all kind of goes hand in hand. When you know who you are, when you've decided what matters, when your nervous system has the capacity to tolerate disappointing other people, to allow yourself to feel other people's disappointment and continue to make forward motion, that's real freedom. That's a yes-filled life. Your boundaries stop feeling like something you have to do or enforce. They become a reflection of who you are. They become that reflection of your identity. And I'd love to hear from you. What is one standard you have decided that you are going to raise in your life? I really want to hear from you. You can comment below on YouTube, or I want to hear from you on any social media platform. Take a screenshot of wherever you're listening right now and tag me. I'm on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook, and I want to hear, what is one standard you're raising now? I want to cheer you on. And if you're looking for ongoing support as you practice living into your values and raising your standards and aligning everything, join the Power Waitlist. And if you're navigating that specific circumstance or decision and you want a trusted partner to help you find your clarity, I'd love to support you through private coaching. One of my personal standards now is I refuse to ignore the signals my body is telling me. So when I get a yes, I know that even if logic doesn't make sense, that it's a yes, I can trust the yes. And I know that when my body says no on something, I know to listen. Or when my body is tired, I know to rest. That's one of my standards. And it has literally changed my life. When I look at my life, even 5 years ago, it was wildly different. I was stepping into my embodiment era, and I would have told you 5 years ago that I was embodied. I would have told you that I felt powerful. And I feel like I'm 10 times more powerful now than I was then. And when I think about the very first time I started working with clients back in 2015, I would have told you I thought I had arrived. I really did. I really thought that. And the growth and the expansion that have happened since then are incredible. And I'm so grateful and appreciative. It makes me emotional because the 2015 version of Brenda did not have these standards. And the 2015 version of Brenda did not have this life. The 2015 version of Brenda was getting taken advantage of, was feeling unappreciated, was in pretty terrible romantic partnerships. I had good friends, thankfully. And a lot of those friendships have remained through the years. And the ones that weren't reciprocal have kind of fallen by the wayside. But I know I can really trust the friends that have stayed with me because they have risen to meet my standards and I have risen to meet theirs. That's what I want for you. If this has been helpful for you, would you please share this episode with someone you care about? And if you could please leave the podcast a comment, a rating, review, wherever you're listening, is incredibly helpful for the podcast to grow. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for making this podcast top 5% globally ranked podcast. Thanks for being here. Bye for now. Until next time.